If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
Today's guest on Horse Chats might be a little bit of a familiar voice if you're an avid podcast listener, because we've got Piper Klemm on today from the Plaid horse. But before we actually introduce Piper, I just want to have a quick chat and remind you that the podcast is brought to you by International Horse College. The vision of International Horse College is to have a world where people safely appreciate, respect and enjoy their horses, and the horses appreciate, respect and enjoy their people. Have a look at the wide variety of horse-friendly courses now at internationalhorsecollege.com, registered training organisation 31352. Now, Piper, are you there? How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, that's good. Piper, I just want to tell people a little bit about you. They might recognise your voice. You know, if people listen to one podcast, I think they listen to others. And it's Dr. Piper Klemm, okay? And she's the owner and publisher of The Plaid Horse. And Piper, your mission is to educate young equestrians in every facet of our industry and to empower young women in particular to find their voices and their stories and to share them. Okay, now you've spent your whole entire career focusing on education through various channels, and the Plaidcast is one of them. And we'll talk to you a little bit about that, but I'd particularly like to talk to you about why is it your mission to empower young women in particular? And before we even start, I'm not quite sure, and I hate to put you on the spot, and I normally remind people beforehand, do you have a favourite quote? Something that you would say regularly, something that drives you, that inspires you, something that you find yourself talking to people all the time and, you know, just repeating the same thing over and over and over. Is there anything about that you'd like to say before I ask a question about the...
Yeah, I don't have a quote specifically, but I have a Post-it on my desk and it has 3 words on it and it says metagame, shame, and compensation. And I think that almost every way that people and a lot of times horses act kind of comes down to those 3 things. So we want to believe that things are really straightforward and we all want things. I want things to be straightforward. I wish that, you know, if you acted the same way in 10 scenarios, it could start becoming predictable. But humans are really hard to predict. It's hard to have a lot of social interactions. And I have a ton of social interactions. So I try to really emphasize where people are coming from. And I think those 3 words kind of identify to me where everyone comes to a situation from. So compensation is just like your horse. Like when your horse might present that they're off on their left front, you know, it could actually be a right hind injury that they're compensating by putting more weight on their left front. And then that's where you're seeing the injury. And people are the same way when they have kind of shortcomings or issues that they're trying to compensate for. They react in a variety of different ways, and it can make it a lot easier to interact with other people to know, kind of have some understanding of where they're coming from or what they're trying to compensate for. Shame, I think, is unfortunately a huge part of our industry. I think a lot of people in our industry feel shame that they don't have enough money and go to enough horse shows and don't have the right horse and don't have the right tack and don't have the right helmet and don't have the right this and that. And I think that you know, it's hard to look around our industry and really appreciate what you have when you see people who have so much more. And I think a lot of people, whether they can communicate it or not, can't kind of wrap their head around that little bit of shame that they have. And I think it really influences their actions. And then metagame. Are you familiar with the concept of metagame?
No, if you could explain it, that'd be great.
Yeah. So metagame is how you play the game based on the rules. So it's not about the game itself. It's about strategy for that. So ostensibly, you know, when you're in a competition, it's about riding your horse. But there are so many other factors to that. Like if you haven't read the rule book, if you you know, you might get eliminated because you make a mistake for not knowing the rule book. So you can be the best horse rider and have the best horse book, have the best horse in the competition, be the best horse rider, and have everything to offer. But if you don't follow the rule book, if you start jumping before the buzzer, you know, if you whatever, it doesn't matter how good you are. There's an underlying game going on besides the game. like a lot of video gamers talk about metagame a lot, and it's very common there. We don't talk about it in our industry much, and I love to talk about it. And, if you see it there's every sport has their version of metagame, their version of strategy. Every like television game show has their version of strategy. Like Jeopardy is, you think it's a game about knowledge, but it's a game about knowledge of who can use a buzzer the fastest and risk the right amount for the daily double and be really strategic. And so there's so many ways that you can be smarter about our sport just by understanding it better and really making a pattern and that kind of stuff. And so those are kind of the three words that I keep up all the time, because I think most conversations I have in the horse world and most times I interact with people, it boils down to those three things. And if you can kind of explore where people are coming from and what they're bringing to the table, it really helps me with being more empathetic and having better interactions and helping them more.
Yeah. Certainly something to think about there. Now, this mission, to educate young equestrians in every facet of our industry, but to empower young women in particular to find their voices and stories. Why that mission? What sort of started that off?
I come from a family of educators. It's pretty much all professors in my family, and none of them are horse people. And I wanted to do this horse thing when I was a kid, and my parents had no idea what they were signing up for. But I really carry their sense of purpose. They have a ton of purpose, and they raised me with a ton of purpose about how much education can empower people and change your circumstances, and how important it is. And coming into our industry, a lot of people have less formal education or less what we would call traditional education. But every time people learn more about horses, they make better decisions for the horses. As a horse lover, I think the more we educate everyone, our horses benefit, our people benefit. We can take better care of each other. And so the more education we can have for everyone, the better decisions people can make, and the better care horses can have, and the more empathetic we can be. And I really believe in education in all forms. That being said, I come from a very traditionally academic family, and I believe in that stuff also. But I also believe that we should be educating people anywhere they want to learn. If people want to learn from an Instagram post, we should meet them there with education. If people want to learn in conversation, we should meet them there in education. Anywhere people want to learn, to me, is an acceptable place to learn, and I want to be part of it. And for young women in particular, I really believe that a lot of women have so much more voice than they feel entitled, able, whatever, to pursue. And there's so many smart, talented young women with great stories who need a little more encouragement. I think of so many times where I've interacted with young men and young women at the same age, and in random contexts. Like a couple of years ago, I was at a horse show, and I taught a young lady how to drive stick shift in my car. And then a couple of weeks later, by chance, I taught a young gentleman who was the same age to drive stick shift in my car. And she got so frustrated, and she would have said that she was the worst person ever at driving stick. And he stalled probably 10 times more than she did. and he got out of the car, and I was like, oh, I'm pretty good at that. And it's just like that confidence gap. And it's not an ability gap. It's not a diligence gap. It's not anything else. And I think that with a little more encouragement and finding their voice, I really believe confidence comes from finding your own thing, putting yourself out there, risking things, and learning where you're right and where you're wrong and what you truly have to give. And I don't think we push people enough to try things on their own as a society, especially at a young age anymore. And I think that the ones that are really impacted by that are young women. And I really want to give a voice and the encouragement to close that confidence gap so that results are more ability oriented and not hindered by a lack of confidence.
you say anymore, do you think that confidence gap has changed? I mean, look back over 100 years ago. Do you think that women and younger girls, teenagers, are more confident now than they were 100 years ago? Or do you think that's changed? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
I think that people did stuff, I really believe most people rise to expectations. And 100 years ago, we expected people to go work the farm and go be adults at a young age, and they did. And nowadays, like, I see more and more young people who don't get their driver's license because they don't even really want the independence. They're scared of the independence. I see so much anxiety and so much, I'm not gonna put myself out there unless it's the exact right thing. Or, you meet with a student and they're like, well, tell me exactly how I should do it. And I'm like, I don't know, you have to do it. You have to try things and see what works for you and what doesn't. And my path that I took where you are was 15 years ago. It doesn't work now. It's you need to put yourself out there and you need to try things. And I really see a lot of young people that are so busy waiting for everything to be perfect that they don't get started. And I don't think humanity was able to do that, either gender, 100 years ago. If you didn't get started, you starved. And I do think with social media and body image and shame and, weight issues and all that, they impact women more than they impact men in society. And I think we have to keep an eye out on that and make sure that no one's going to live a life that's easy ever, anywhere in the world, in any circumstance. No one's life is easy. And to me, it's how do we give people proper coping mechanisms? So, I'm not ever going to say to a young lady, oh, you're never going to be weight shamed or something, or this is never going to happen to you. It probably will. All of this stuff will probably happen. But how do we give people good coping mechanisms so that they know whose opinion to respect in the first place, who they should be listening to, who's worthy of their respect? Because I wake up to internet comments sometimes that I'm like, oh boy. And really, in the beginning of the magazine stuff, I did not have the coping mechanisms to handle that stuff, and I've developed them, and so I'm really passionate about putting coping mechanisms in people's hands, and it's really the same in training the horses. I mean, I'm an amateur rider. I make a ton of mistakes, and my horse has a ton of coping mechanisms so that he knows when I make a mistake, he can get me out of it, and he has confidence in that. And I want young people and young women especially to have these coping mechanisms for this world.
Yep. I know that sometimes, as a coach, people would want a better horse, especially if in the situation where they've got a couple of horses to choose from and they want the better horse. And the question is, do you want the better horse or do you want to be a better rider?
Absolutely.
Now, Piper, you're really focusing on education. Okay, you've got the Plaidcast, but you've got the Plaidcast as a magazine and also as a podcast. Which one came first and why? How did you come into the podcast industry? Obviously it's to educate people, which is, how I started. But tell us a little bit about how you got started with the podcast particularly, but also was the magazine first or was one complementing the other? How did that work out?
Yep. So the magazine's been around since 2003, and I'll talk about that in a second. The Plaidcast I was an early listener to podcasts. I was in 2005, 2006, when you had to download them all onto your iPod one by one. And I loved podcasting right from the start. I like to read, but honestly, I get tired reading a lot. I fall asleep reading books. And when podcasts started coming out, it was just such a natural fit to me. I really learn well in an audio format. The fact that you can do it while you're doing something else, you're probably listening right now, driving or folding laundry or, cooking or, and I love that so much that you can kind of keep your brain engaged during mundane tasks. And I think podcasts are such a great place to learn about topics that you would never, I'm not going to read a whole book on something, but I'll listen to a half-hour podcast on just about anything. I think that's it's a really good amount of time and a really good framework there. So I always wanted a Hunter Jumper podcast, a podcast about horse shows in particular. There wasn't one. And for years, I asked like all my friends, I'm like, will you start a podcast? Will you start a podcast? Like, I'll help you. And none of them would do it. And so in 2016, and Glenn at Horse Radio Network had been bugging me for a few years too. And so in 2016, I was like, fine, if no one else will do it, I'll do it. And I didn't. I'm kind of a very reluctant podcast host. Like I really wanted to listen to a podcast. I didn't want to host a podcast. I just wanted to listen to one about horse shows. And I've really grown into loving it. I love it as a forum. I love that, that we've had some great interviews. It's really interesting to me. We've connected with a whole new set of people. And so we're about 200 episodes in right now, and it's been amazing. And, to do around everything else and to promote the rest of the enterprises we have. It's just, to me, it's everything I've dreamed of and more from what I anticipated. And, I had no idea it would be this successful. And people come up to me all the time, and, that it's been a great trip on that. And it's not something I necessarily would have chosen to do for myself. And, bringing it back to the last question, like, I think that, when you talk about that confidence thing, I don't think I had the confidence without other people really encouraging me to kind of take the plunge and do it. And so I'm really grateful that, other people took the time to kind of give me that nudge. And that's what I really want to do for other people. The magazine. So the magazine was established in 2003, and I bought it in 2014. And it was kind of right at the cusp of a lot of the social media stuff. And, it was a great time to get in and really grow things and give it that online presence and get the blog going and so many different facets that we have of it. I have no publishing background at all. My PhD is in chemistry, and I worked on contrast imaging agents in organic molecules for contrast agents and like MRI and PET scans and developing novel therapeutics like that. But, as I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast knows, once you're a horse person, you are a horse person. It always brings you back. And so my treat to myself when I finished my PhD was that I could go to a whole circuit and just enjoy it. And so it was an 8-week circuit in Normal, California. And when I finished my PhD, I was just going to go relax and enjoy it. Well, when you've been going at that high level so much, a million miles an hour, like not having anything to do with a horse show lasted like a few days. And then I was like, okay, I'm kind of bored. And I didn't know anyone there because I'd never really lived there before at that time. So I didn't know anyone, and I was just trying to power down. And someone put a Facebook post up, and they were looking for someone to cover the Grand Prix on Sunday. And I had never thought about it before. I never thought about how a magazine came really into existence. I'd never thought about, that someone's out there in the rain and the blistering sun, taking all those pictures, writing up all those press releases late at night. And I took the plunge, and I covered the Grand Prix and all of these top riders. Like, for someone who's always asked a million questions my whole life and wanted to know and wanted to learn and wanted to understand more and basically been called annoying, to have all these top riders like be so excited to tell me how they rode a line and why they rode a line and why the course is good for their horse and all of this educational stuff. It was just a complete light bulb moment. And like I said earlier, like I really believe that education can be brought to people anywhere. And on our side of stuff, no one was really doing, in the US, no one was really doing stuff like that at the time. And no one was really trying to bring education to Instagram. People were like, well, kids should come to us and learn about the classics. And I'm like, well, why don't we just go to them and teach them the classics? Why don't we meet them on there? If they want to be on Snapchat or TikTok, like, let's meet them there. If they want to be on Instagram, if they want to text, like, wherever people want to learn, let's go there and teach them. And so I came in with not really, so I started doing more and more with different publications and photography and writing, and really, there's not much actual business in being a freelancer. It's pretty rough out there. And I also found that I wasn't able to make the decisions that I thought were correct all the time. And so I took the plunge and cold called around, and I ended up buying the Plaid horse in 2014. And it was an owner finance deal. So I made a down payment and had monthly payments for 2 years to the previous owner. And that's how I was able to afford it. And from there, we just, it's been, and the first, in the beginning, I had no idea what I was doing. I tried to mimic how it was before the best I could without making changes until I truly understood it. And I really understood the processes. And then once I felt like I understood all the mechanics of how it worked, then it was off to the races. I mean, we've just grown in every dimension in our blog and adding the podcast in. And I truly think that we have made a tremendous impact on educating young riders and promoting education and helping people think more about the horses and the sport, mental game and fitness and all the stuff that they can control. I think it's so easy to be like, well, if I had a better horse or if I had more money or if I had this, that, or the other thing, I'd be better. And like, of course, we've all had that pity party with ourselves. I have. But the reality is that there's a lot of stuff I can control, and I can control my fitness, and I can control my mental game, and I can control the decisions I make and not be penny wise, pound foolish. I can control my, financial goals. I can control all of this stuff. And when you really talk about what you can control and work on that, this industry feels a lot less scary, to be honest.
Yeah. Piper, I really love your philosophy, where people want to learn, let's go there and teach them. I think that's just fantastic. And, you've got more of an educational background than me with professors in the family. I think as high as we go as a PhD. So, but it's the whole education bit. And I think that's why I started the International Horse College, and then from there came to Horse Chats. And I love talking to people. I'm exactly the same as you. But just going to the people that you talk to on your podcast, do you think that there's certain core skills and character traits that someone needs to commence working in the industry? And this is regardless of knowledge, but their basic philosophy, understanding of life. What makes someone want to work in the horse industry? Like you said before, well, once you've got it, you've always got it. But what is it, do you think, that people have got?
I think the love of horses and the desire to spend our lives doing this is at some level innate. Most people I talk to that love horses, even if they come from a non-horse family like me, just even at a young age, they just knew, they just had that feeling. But I think, what makes someone successful in the horse industry, I think it is like any other industry. It is not hard to be adequate at most things in life. It is extremely difficult to be good or really good or exceptional. And I think that if you want to dabble around at just about anything, with any other sport, biking, running, swimming, football, anything else, if you want to dabble around, it is not hard to dabble around. It is not hard to have fun and not hard to be, maybe lightly competitive or, have a league or whatever. But it is truly consuming to be exceptional at anything. And I think the horses are, so much like that. And the people who are incredibly good writers have the same thing as incredibly good riders. They write all the time. They write crap. They write good stuff. They edit. They wake up and write. They're disciplined about writing, and they write and write and write. And the top riders and the top everything, the top farriers. Like, my farrier is obsessed with horse feet. She will talk to me about horse feet all day long. All she thinks about is angles and different things she's seen. And she is so good because she is obsessed, and this is what she does. Like, she drives her truck around from appointment to appointment, analyzing things, thinking about it, planning for next time. And anyone who is truly committed like that is going to be good. And it's just an obsession, and you have to fail, and you have to ride so many horses and not have rides that go poorly. And it's just like riders who throw out, things that they write, or have crap that they're not using, or, if you're not putting yourself out there and you're not failing regularly and you're not continuing to try and continuing to show up and using the data of your failures to make better decisions next time, you're not going to be truly successful at any job, I think.
Now, just going to another area of your life, the ponies. How many ponies have you got?
I have about 16 ponies right now. So when I was a kid, and my non-horse parents got they got me what every 12-year-old needs, which is an unbroke pony. And but my parents are business professors, and so they wanted it to be a learning thing. And so I had to give a presentation of why I was getting a pony, and then I had to keep track of all the finances, mileage to the barn, every lesson, every shoe, every blanket. And so this went on, and my parents, to their huge credit, let me make all the decisions. They let me, decide what horse shows I wanted to go to and all this stuff. And then they let me make all the decisions on the other end and about what I wanted to do when she was trained and when she was a good pony. And she was so hard. Like, she was a monster. Like, I mean, I think all 2-year-old ponies are somewhat monsters, and I had no idea. We had no idea what we didn't know. Like, it's set up for failure. But I just put in so much time that, like, I think I bored the pony to death over a few years. She was like, okay, you can ride me. I'm so bored. You tried to ride me. But I had the diligence. So she ended up being, I started leasing her out, and again, made every mistake in the book, learned from it, got a little better each year. And she went on to have a lot of success. And so when I was 19, I bought my parents out of all the money they put into my riding career growing up. Every lesson, every trip to the barn, everything. And I was telling this story to someone, and they said, they were like, oh, that's so mean that your parents did that to you. And a couple of days later, I was talking to my mom, and I was like, oh, I was talking to so-and-so, and they were like, that's so mean, she did that to you. And my mom goes, what? It's not like I charge you interest. So that's my mother. She's amazing. And so kind of throughout grad school and stuff, I started thinking, like, okay, like, maybe I could buy another pony. Maybe I can do this again, which is always the fatal horse mistake. Anytime you have a good one, you're like, I'm a genius. I can do this again. You're always wrong. But anyway, so I thought that I was a genius and that I could do it again. And so I got a few more ponies, and then really made every mistake in the book and learned what I didn't know and all this stuff. And I met a great partner, probably 7 or 8 years ago now, Emily Ellick, and she is that obsession that we just talked about. She is obsessed with ponies. She's obsessed with training ponies. She sells or leases more ponies than anyone else in North America, and she is incredible to work with. And she always, I think what I see a lot in the industry is, because there's not really a high barrier of entry to become a trainer, to become a horse dealer, or this kind of stuff, that a lot of people think that they're honest and think that they're doing right by you. But if you're ignorant, you can't actually be honest. And, so one of the things I've seen is, like, I see it over and over, people with the best intentions, like, literally, like, if you ask them, like, oh, would you ever scam someone? They would never scam someone. But by trying to represent themselves as someone qualified to put together a deal without actually having the expertise, they are kind of scamming people. And, Emily's knowledge is unbelievable. Like, I think I know a lot about ponies, and I've learned a lot over the years. And hers is she has stratospherically more knowledge than I do. And so getting to partner with her has been an incredible experience. For me to be just around, you always want to be surrounded by the greatest people that you can in every arena. And I feel honored to be around her greatness. And she always puts the pony first and always makes a long-term decision. And her horse care is phenomenal. So the ponies are a passion of mine, but I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't have the right partnership in place. And I'm really fortunate that I do.
Yeah. So you've got 16, you said. Yeah, because you look a little tall to be having ponies, so that sort of explains it. Yeah.
Oh, I don't ride them. Yeah, no, it's a business. It's a lease business. Yeah.
What do you think with that business was the hardest thing you had to overcome? Now, we're not talking money, because money's always a problem, but, to get into that leasing ponies, you've got 16 ponies and it's a business, but what do you think was the hardest bit?
I actually, the interesting thing and that I say to people is, like, once you start getting the infrastructure together, I think it's less stressful to own a bunch than it is to own maybe one or two, because if you're leasing out one or two and one has an injury or something like that, it's like 100% of your portfolio. And so I'm at a point right now where I have a very diverse portfolio of different ponies that do different jobs. And so I think it's less stressful to have more, which is a bit counterintuitive. And the other thing is, and this does touch on money a little bit, but like the infrastructure of having a business like that it's incredible to build. And so, like, if I think about it, like, back at the envelope, like, Emily probably has $50,000 of pony bits just sitting in her barn. And anything that comes up and anything that happens, like, she has that bit. Not only does she have that bit, she has that bit in pony size and, can make it happen. And just like amass, amass. And that's one item, we're not talking about everything else in the barn. And so kind of amassing the collections of all the right things, I really think just takes decades to get all the right, pony specific tack and to get all the right pieces like that. And then I would say the biggest thing is relationships. Having a lease business is we're getting the ponies back every year and have to lease out again next year. And we love the ponies and we want to keep them their whole careers, and we like to keep an eye on them, and we want them happy and sound and fit and have children who love them for both moral and emotional reasons, because we love them, but also for business reasons so that they can go back out on lease next year. And really learning, like, who does a good job, who takes good care of them, who keeps them at a good weight, both on the fat and thin side, and what programs really make them happy, because everyone's philosophies are a little different. And having a pony that can go out and go in every different program and still be successful is the trick, right? Because some of these programs are like in cities and don't have any turnout, and some of them are out in the country and they can go out all night, and like there's every different, different trainers believe in this or that, or, want them lunge more organic, or want them, quieter, or, want them to do this division or that division, or, there's so many different factors in this that really having that circle of people that you trust to send your animal to for a whole year, that you might not even see it, and that it'll send it back in the shape that it left in or better. You inevitably make a lot of mistakes. You trust a lot of people, and then when they come back next year and want to lease another pony, you might be out of ponies.
What about the podcast? What do you think? And I know I've had challenges. There's certainly challenges there, and money aside. To get your podcast started, what was your biggest challenge?
I think that, one of the things that I think that the magazine was able to financially support the podcast until the podcast was able to support itself. So in a lot of ways, I had very much a cushion there that a lot of podcasters don't have. And I grumble about this in other aspects of things. So, there are other magazines where people own a magazine and then also own something else in the industry that is the actual money driver. And so they kind of run the magazine at a loss to drive the money into their actual product they're trying to promote or something like that. And, the podcast was that for us for, I would say, the first 2 years. The magazine just supported the podcast and we didn't really worry about it. Now the podcast is basically financially at break even. And again, I don't worry about that, and I don't worry about it like making a salary for me, because I view it as an arm of the magazine and a growth place for the magazine. So I think I'm under a lot less pressure than most podcasters because I don't put the same financial expectations on the podcast. But with that said, like, I think that I think it's really hard with all the travel and everything we have going on to find the time to sit down and do it continuously. Like, just like anything else that you do, it's fun and novel the first how many 100 times, but, at some point it becomes work, and then you have to balance that work with everything else you're doing. And we record on Mondays a lot, and I go to, like, in a normal year, not now, I'm at home all the time now. But in a normal year, I go to 40 or 50 horse shows. And so I'm like, some days just dragging, getting my headset on Monday because, like, oh, my flight was delayed and I didn't get home till 2 a.m. and had clients all morning. And I do think it's to put out a good podcast. I think it's exhausting on the host. So I think that maintaining excellence through everything that happens in life over years, I mean, and you're the same way. I mean, it's the amount of stuff that happens in your life over years is, like, it's easy to say, oh, I won't miss a week, for whatever, 12 weeks or maybe even a year. But the amount of stuff that just occurs in life over many years is hard to sustain.
Yeah, yeah. What about, and I'm asking you this particularly because your parents were, you said they were business professors. So I'm really interested. A common fault for people when they take on a horse business, we want to get involved with horses, and because we're passionate about the subject, and I've got actually an ebook that's 101 careers in the horse industry, and I keep thinking about all these different careers and businesses and everything else within the horse industry. But, some people say I had a horse business once, but then I couldn't sustain it or whatever. What do you think is a common fault? And again, I know there's the financial, but lots of businesses start off at a loss. But a common ongoing fault that you see with people when they start businesses, any sort of business within the horse industry?
I think within the horse industry, people very much confuse, like, looking fancy or being fancy with making money. And so you get all kinds of, different curtains or drapes or matching trunks or all this stuff. And then, there's so many things like going out to dinner and being seen with the right people, or, going to different, maybe VIP parties or having a VIP table in general, or, there's so many different places to spend money that make you look fancy and might make you feel good that are not about the horse and not about your business. And, and I'm not saying that they never are, horses get sold in the VIP tent, people talk to each other. Like, there are rational business expenses here, but, like, it's a slippery slope. I see lots of people sliding down the slope. And, I think the people who truly make money at this have a much more utilitarian approach than the people who are here for other reasons. And if you're here for other reasons, like, you're welcome. You're welcome to be here for other reasons. But if your business's goal is to, make money or stay in business, I think you need to have a utilitarian approach. Another thing is just knowing how much stuff costs. And it's not that stuff, like, I think most horse professionals do not know where every dollar in their business is. When you really sit down and talk to them, do they really know how much a bag of shavings is? Do they really know, is board a loss leader? Where they make, if board is a loss leader, are they making that money up at horse shows? Like, how many horse shows do clients have to go to a month to make up the loss leader or board? I think that these business questions, it's a lot of people don't know their economics. So it's not that, like, just it's hard to make money. It's that, like, knowing what about your business makes money and what doesn't. So to go back to my podcast example, in the beginning, I really wanted the podcast to make money out of the gate, and I wanted it to be in the black out of the gate. And, you remember what it was like, even just a few years ago. Like, people didn't know what podcasts were. Trying to explain to old people and decision makers and sell ads for a podcast was, like, basically impossible. And finally one day I sat down and I said, okay, look at your numbers. Like, you spent 10 hours trying to sell a podcast ad for $100 yesterday. And, today you spent 90 minutes and sold an $1,000 ad in the magazine. Okay, like if I look at that rationally, I'm better off letting the podcast go at a loss until it picks itself up a little bit more organically and helps me out a little bit and selling full-page magazine ads than I am to beat my head against the wall explaining people how a podcast works. So, I think, and there's so many equivalents on that with board and horse showing and training horses. And so I teach a college class on this, on the economics and the metagame of horse businesses. And one of the examples from class this year was this trainer who realized that owning the truck and trailer himself was a bad deal for him, because he could, if he spent the day before the horse show driving all the horses back and forth, he wasn't at the horse show talking to people selling horses. And he realized that he could sell a horse in the amount of time it took him to drive all the trips back and forth of the truck and trailer. So he's putting out, $100,000 of his own money at least to buy a truck and trailer, to have it, to ship the horses back and forth. And then he's spending all this time and all this paperwork making sure that the trucks, all the paperwork's done all the time and all the tires are pressure, and taking all this risk and driving the truck back and forth to the horse show. Because the 6 horse, if he brings 15 horses or 18 horses to the horse show, he's got to make a couple trips. And then when he did all of that and how much paperwork and time and effort it took him to be a shipping business, he actually made more money by trying to sell horses during that time. So then he changed his business around so that he uses a commercial shipper. He then doesn't have to think about any of the time. He's not spending any of the time making sure that all the inspections are good and the tires have pressure and that they're passing emissions. Like, all of that stuff's off his plate. He spends that time selling horses, and he actually makes more money.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense, because I do ask people about that, what's a common fault? And they invariably come back and say money. Well, you're actually not saying that. You're saying that's not necessarily the problem. It's the economics and the making sure you know where your money is, and making sure you know your prices, and working out your hourly cost and everything else. It's so much more important than just saying, I haven't got enough money.
Yep. And can you do things, less fancy? Is there a way to, are there different vendors you can, where can you cut corners and where can you not cut corners with good horse care? I mean, I think that's such a fundamental one, because, there are places that people can cut that they don't, and then there are places you absolutely should not cut, which you should not.
Yeah. Piper, what are you looking forward to now? What have you got planned in the next, 1 year, 5 years? I'm sure you've got something there, because you seem to be a pretty organised person.
Well, it's kind of hard to plan right now. But so last year we debuted our children's book series, Show Strides, which I'm really proud of. It's a chapter book for middle grade readers. It's on Kindle and Audible, also, and in print on Amazon. And the first 3 books are out, and what I'm really excited about these books is that there are no mean girls, and there's no bullying of other girls, and it's girls and boys too. There's a boy main character introduced in book 3, and Tally and Mac are the 2 girls, and they have regular horse struggles, and they work together and they problem solve, and they learn about riding and learn about horses, and it's not, there is no girl that they're bullying. There is no kind of mean girl, because to me that's not where we are in 2020. It's not realistic. I think that it's a really good feel-good concept book series that I'm really excited about, and I'm really excited for more people to read and have more books come out. So that's definitely on the horizon. We've been publishing a few more books. We're working right now in the next few months with Trafalgar Square Press, and going to be putting out a second edition of Jeff Teal's book on riding hunters, jumpers, and equitation for Kindle and print for now, and I'm hoping for Audible. And I think it's a fabulous book. It's one of the books that I teach out of for one of my college courses, and then I'm also I taught 3 online college credit courses for equestrians that had open enrollment earlier this year. And they were a huge success, and we talked a lot about the concepts that we've talked about right now with a lot of great interviews with people in the sport and lectures and reading and podcasts and then forum discussions. So they were online, but everyone could participate from the horse show or wherever they were. And those went really well. So I'm really excited to expand those and have some more of that stuff. And then, just the daily getting the magazine out and keeping the blog moving and the podcast going, just keeping all the moving parts going is incredibly time consuming. And so it's just kind of trying to maintain all the things we've been trying to build for the last few years.
Piper, it's just been wonderful talking to you. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are going to say, yeah, that's Piper. We know Piper. Yep. If you're going to summarise a message for our listeners, besides go to my podcast, we'll talk about contact details in a bit. But do you have a message, something that you'd like them to think about, just go away, think about within the horse world, the horse industry?
I just want everyone to feel empowered, that there is so much you can learn. There's so many good books in this industry. There's so many good lectures online. There's so many good old horsemen who might be sitting around with not enough to do right now, who would love to tell you stories and love to give you advice. And, education is in your control in today's world with the internet, and all these podcasts and all this content. It's in your hands. It's your job to actually learn as much as you can, and you have the power to do it. And there's no financial barrier, and there's no other barriers. It's just work. And the really good horsemen I know all read a lot. They all take a lot of notes. They all think about the sport obsessively and try to put new data in and try to make better conclusions. And I hope everyone listens feels empowered that they can take control of their own sport, their own riding career, and really sit down and read and listen and watch and be open for education in every form that it comes into you.
Oh, that's perfect. Lovely message. Piper, the best way to contact you. If people are saying, I want to listen more, I want to contact you for something, ask your advice, what would you say? What's the best way? Is it to go to your website?
Theplaidhorse.com, and the Plaidcast, you can listen every week. It's on Horse Radio Network or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can search for the Plaidcast and listen to us there. On theplaidhorse.com, we have every full issue of the magazine. Nothing's behind a paywall. You can read everything. And then check out Show Strides on Amazon. And and my email address is piper@theplaidhorse.com, and I read every single email that comes in.
Perfect. All right. Thanks very much, Piper, and looking forward to catching up with you again soon. I'm sure that we've got many more conversations that we can have. So thanks for chatting to us today. Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.